This year's Balikatan exercises were unprecedented. In terms of size, it was just as big as last year. Up to 17,000 troops, including 11,000 from the United States, were participating in this year's drills across weeks. But more than that, it was the location of the exercises that was eye catching. On one hand, for the first time, the Philippines conducted drills with the United States and also in another first with France in the Philippines exclusive economic zone in the West Philippine Sea. But importantly, there were also exercises in the Cagayan region with an eye on contingencies in Taiwan. In order to understand the relevance of this year's Balikatan exercises, the latest developments when it comes to EDCA bases and growing cooperation between the Philippines and its allies in northern provinces, not to mention growing concerns over China's infiltration of the Philippines through sharp power operations, through espionage activities, and other kinds of allegations of interference. We'll talk to an expert who knows a thing or two about China, its influence in the region, and the future of the Philippines as a rising middle power. Dr. Cabalza, thank you very much again for joining us.
It's nice to be back in your show. It's bigger in your studio right now.
Yes, bigger and bigger issues to discuss. A
course.
lot is happening, obviously, and I think as anyone involved in security studies, this must be really interesting times. Speaking of interesting times, before we go to the latest developments, whether it's the Balikatan exercises recently, whether it's the latest developments in the Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea, let's go back to your PhD dissertation. And people will realize, actually, my value ito. This is not a geeky, academic thing. You talked about strategic culture, and you're among the first people, if not the first, who tried to really look at yung concept of strategic culture. Can you tell us a little bit about what is strategic culture? Why should we care about strategic culture? And how is strategic culture in the Philippines evolving, hopefully in the right direction in recent years? Yeah.
Well, basically, when we last talked about strategic culture in the Philippines, we discussed about the aspirations, ambitions, and the emotions of Filipinos. This time around, it has evolved. We're talking also about strategy making, national defense, which I think at the National Defense College right now, they are trying to refocus, going back to the heritage of national defense instead of expanding the concept of national security, because they are adapting to the current changes right now because of this volatility, ambiguity in the geopolitics right now. So, meaning to say, if we translate now to the changes of strategic culture, we're talking also about war gaming because of the Balikatan exercises. Imagine you have 14 nations observing us for the first time in Philippine history. We're seeing a grand strategy where the Philippines is mounting its biggest territorial defense right now. So I mean to say it has evolved over time. So we're not just looking at the internal security this time, but we are now refocusing on external defense.
So strategic culture essentially is the this kind of a set of ideas and practices that allows a country to organize itself to adapt to the world and also make the most out of the world. I mean that comes at the top of my mind, right?
It's part of the algorithm also of how you.
That's the better way if you want to put it. That's the Silicon Valley way. It's your software. It's your
Definitely.
software, your algorithm of dealing with the international system to make the most for your country. The reason we discuss is because sa madaling salita, matagal tayo nagdidepende sa Amerika. So for a long time, the stereotypes of the Philippines is an American satellite, proxy, tuta ng America. Some of this is propaganda. Some of this is kind of true. Let's be honest. I mean, in terms of reliance on America. So strategic culture is also about independently thinking about your national interests and autonomously acting in the international system, right?
I agree with you. That's the reason why I've been telling you to my media interviews. I hope that one time in our future, we will decide to get out from our alliance. Because if we talk about independent foreign policy, you don't have to rely with major powers. Of course, we have been dealing with the Americans, although it's not because we don't like them, but they have been supporting us. But, they've been our brother, parent. They have to allow us
To grow on our own.
grow on our own. That's the reason why we have to get out from that alliance, especially now that many countries are also offering some support for us, part of diversification and, of course, interoperability. So we have to really get out from that alliance, maybe build a different model for us, because if you try to look at our neighbors in Southeast Asia, they don't have alliance with major powers. But at the same time, they were able to build their own defense posture.
Or they had to build their defense because they
to.
had no alliance to rely on.
That's the point, right? They had
yeah.
to build, but they were forced to. And because of that, you would see that you see the defense posture. At the same time, they have to modernize their military, which is part of their strategic culture. So hoping that the Philippines will arrive to that kind of future scenario. Let's see what we can do after that.
Okay, my concern would be is, does it have to be black and white? Because I can think of Turkey, a country we probably will discuss more later on, because I think their defense industry development has some sort of blueprint. It's a NATO member, second largest member of NATO, but Erdogan, Ankara, many times they act in clear defiance of the United States, clearly for the national interests of Turkey, whether it's their relationship with China, its relationship with Russia. So we have examples of having the cake and eating it too, in a sense of building your own autonomous outlook, but still having the benefits of the alliance, not to mention in our own region, countries like South Korea, for instance, our U.S. ally. But so don't you think there could be kind of a happy mean, a golden mean, whereby there is still some sort of alliance mutual defense obligation, but at the same time there's significant room for us to really grow and find our own ways in the world?
Definitely, we can create another kind of hybridity. Remember, in the Philippines, we were the first one to do the SRDP, also self-reliance defense posture. It was us in Southeast Asia. But
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, that was in it started during the Commonwealth Act. That was when, of course, the
This
Philippines.
is Quezon.
That was looking at the constitutional relevance of the SRDP. That was the first time when we built our National Defense National Defense, Department of National Defense. One of the bureaus was Government Arsenal.
Interesting.
Yeah, the reason why Government Arsenal, of course, they cater for the production of bullets and small arms. That's the origin of our SRDP. And then, of course, during the time of Marcos Sr., he had the grand plan.
Interesting,
to build an industrial complex. That's the reason why you have the Bongbong missile.
Right.
That was the.
Well, I see the YouTube videos of the Bongbong missile.
That was the advent of it, no?
Right.
Because we're trying to create our own. Because of course the Americans at the time, they were not supporting the first Marcosian administration for its internal security. So the way to go is not to depend with the Americans at the time.
Right.
So until such a time that South Korea even realized of copying our SRDP, because they thought that, of course, South Korea was poor at the time. We were better off compared to South Korea. So the problem there, we had the weak research and development, R&D.
Yes.
That's very important if you would want to foster or build your own SRDP. Secondly, economy. Of course, back in 1960s, 70s, our economy was good yet.
Still okay, yeah.
During 80s, 90s, and of course, 2000, the economy was slumping. So it wasn't good for investors to build up their own industrial base, basically. And then, of course, there were proposals now, especially that you have the modernization program since 1995, and then during the time of FVR, and then, of course, it was revived during the time of President Aquino. And now it's still a debate whether or not we will build our own SRDP. So it's especially now that we are transitioning to external defense. You really need that, because at the end of the day, it's so hard to keep on buying all those military material abroad. Right. Let's allow the reason for globalization. That's part of it, but other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, our neighbors basically, and
you can export and make money and create jobs. I mean, it's
definitely.
It's national security. I mean, it's best of both worlds in a sense. It's self-reliance at the same time building capability. I mean, we'll talk about South Korea very shortly, because it's now kind of a like a North Star for a developing or post-developing country. I mean, it's top 10 in the world right now in export industry as far as defense is concerned, not to mention, their cultural power and economic power. Now, going back to this, I'm glad that you mentioned the Commonwealth era, because the Commonwealth era was a very interesting moment. It was a moment, because I was recently reading Rasil's Brains of the Nation and the debates that were happening in 1910s and 20s, which is, autonomista or federalista, or the Philippines should eventually get its independence. And I think the basic understanding there was we couldn't fight Americans because we didn't have sufficient defensive capabilities. I mean, maybe we could beat Spain, but not the Americans. So some of them were nationalistic Filipinos, but they were realistic to realize we still didn't have that capability. And the idea is that if the Philippines eventually wants to be independent, or force the case, it has to have a capable military of its own at some point to stand on its own. And I think people are aware that in 20s and 30s, Japan was already coming out as a threat, right? It's not like it was peacetime during that time. World War I had already happened. So can we go back to that again? Because there we see some green shoots of what could, I mean, this is 100 years later, right?
Yeah.
This is almost 100 years later. We're still having the same debate, but maybe we want to get this right this time, right?
Right. Let's look at the historical context. Remember, the bloodiest war we had experienced in the Philippines was the Philippines-U.S. war, not the Spanish-American war. You have to remember that. And then, of course, after that, when the Americans occupied us, the first thing to do is to pronounce the Commonwealth Act number 1, which is the creation of the Department of National Defense. Because at that time, the U.S. was becoming bolder, and it's the new superpower.
New empire,
Yeah. And of course, they created the concept of national security. It was them who suggested about this concept of national security, because they wanted to create their own intelligence, foreign intelligence, and counterintelligence, because they are a big power, a superpower. So at the time, security was not yet defined. It was only in 1970s where they tried to define national security. The reason why they had the concept of national security because of the creation of the national security infrastructures, definitely because of the national defense. Same as what we have done for the Philippines, because we keep on copying the American model. So that was the Commonwealth era. And of course, the Americans at the time, they taught us to think small. That's why, Filipinos keep on on singing the Bahay Kubo kahit munti. We are small. That concept of smallness was embedded in us because they thought that the Americans are here, we will civilize you, and we will take care of your external defense. That's the reason why we focus on our external defense.
So Nick Joaquin was semi-unfair when he blamed us for this culture of smallness, right?
Yeah,
But actually, that was part of that as a colonial legacy.
Right.
We were forced not to think big picture, precisely because that was their way of dominating us, right?
That's the reason why the middle power concept was a big deal for us, because it was a shoot off from that mentality of smallness. Remember, we were our ancestors since the American period until our parents, they were taught that Filipinos should think small, or we are a small
know your
state,
place.
know your place.
Yeah.
We don't have to desire for grandness and so on. So
Interesting.
when the Philippines became a middle power, only recently, that was a big debate for us. Are we really a middle power? When we talk about middle power, do we have military capability to protect our own national interest? Do we have all the military material and capability to flex and show it to our neighbors? And of course, how can we confront China, basically, as a middle power? So we thought of alternative ways because we were talking about strategic culture. And I think lawfare, the legal approach, became our knight in shining armor.
Yes.
Because it brought out the brilliance of our legal luminaries. So because of that, we showed the world that we can become a champion of maritime rules-based norms.
Right.
And that's the reason why 14 nations are observing the Balikatan exercises, because they believe in us in terms of that legal approach.
That's interesting. I mean, before we go to Balikatan, so what you're saying is part of our strategic culture for a while was essentially minamalit natin ang sarili natin. This kind of a subalterning, right? Yeah.
We blame it to colonialism. Maybe because, remember, our intellectuals, during that time, they went to the States, they were the pensionados, they were called the Oreo. Brown
On the outside, white
on the inside. So and then they came back to the Philippines, preaching about American policies,
greatness,
culture, greatness, without looking at our own culture. I think that was a big transition for us.
Interesting. And not looking at our neighborhood, right? I mean, one of the things I realized about Philippines that we know a lot about, North Carolina, but not much about, Indonesia or Thailand, right? Like, when we go as tourists to these countries, at least the first times, it's like a different world. But we go to the U.S., it feels like second home, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe because that was the product of the audiovisual, of cinema, of media. Because, of course, they were brought by the Americans. Naturally, everything comes from America. That's what we know about. So we have forgotten about our neighbors, Even if you ask our kids right now, if you ask the capitals of these Southeast Asian nations, they don't know because all they know is
Singapore
about,
lang.
Yeah, Singapore lang
I think
siguro.
everyone
Yeah,
knows Singapore because
Yeah,
there's a Singapore envy.
right, right, right.
Di tayo maging first world like Singapore. I mean, it's a long conversation. But even the discourse about Singapore and the Singapore envy shows our ignorance about history of Singapore, what they had to go through. And by the way, they're a city-state, not
Yeah, yeah,
fullness-fledged nation-sized country. Philippines, middle power. So what you're saying is that sometime in this century, there was a realization na itong parati natin minamalit ang sarili natin. I actually called it kind of a David complex, but actually that was charitable because David was actually strong and capable and robust, right? He was not small. He was small compared to Goliath, but he was a capable, robust guy. So I think the middle power is more David, right?
Yeah.
I think we had more of an underdog complex.
Yes.
And now we're more having proper David understanding of ourselves, right?
Yes, and it took us to absorb it because if you try to notice it, those who validated that the Philippines is a middle power were the Australians,
Lowy Institute,
the
yeah.
Lowy Institute, and the one at
The Hague, Center for
Copenhagen,
International,
something, this Scandinavian country. So meaning to say, we need validation for us to accept that we have achieved this kind of status already. So you see the smallness to becoming middle power.
And the need for white countries to validate our sense of ourselves in the world, right?
So I think that's the problem also, or maybe not a problem, maybe
a
because
tendency,
because of our colonial experiences also. That's the reason why when we talk about strategic culture for us, we even how we look at the American war colleges in terms of how we replicate also their experiences. Because if we try to look at it right now, even the Defense Department right now is trying to fill in the gaps in terms of how they would educate the future security practitioners, especially that they would want to focus on strategic thinking and war fighting, because that's the nature of national defense, basically, to train soldiers and our reservists to war fight. The last time that we were able to use our reservists, because you have two kinds of the regular forces and the reserve forces, was during the Second World War. So, war is very important to motivate our citizens.
Yeah, it's the shock that gives you.
Definitely. That's the reason why we are experiencing right now this external threat, and that's the reason why the Defense Department has launched its comprehensive archipelagic defense, which they have embedded also in their wargaming in the current Balikatan exercises, to show to us that we have now arrived to a certain point where we have to flex our territorial defense operation.
What is the whole comprehensive archipelagic defense concept about? Is it about the ability for us to respond to contingency 360 degrees, right? I mean, as an archipelagic nation, because we talk about West Philippine Sea, which is all good. And then before that, it's all about Mindanao. But there's a whole other side to the Philippines, right? Benham, Rice, Philippine Sea, and obviously to the north, which we'll discuss more later on, yeah.
Well, I agree. When you talk about comprehensive archipelagic defense, it's like singing Batanes hanggang Hulo. No?
Yeah, medyo itbulaga.
Yeah, because you have to consider the archipelagic nature of the Philippines. Of course, we have the Philippines has been one of the proponents of the archipelagic doctrine during the third UNCLOS. We were one of those countries who provided enlightenment with that together with Indonesia. But we still have lacking domestic laws like the Maritime Zones Act and, of course, the archipelagic sea lanes. But going back to your question, what is this comprehensive archipelagic defense, which up to now, DND has not yet fully operationalized in terms of how they would write it? Is it a concept, a strategy? Some would say that a concept is a strategy, or we are still, it's still in a work of progress, but you are trying to foster how to protect the natural bounties, because you have to remember that you have to protect the fisher folks also, because one of the tributes of the Hague ruling is to allow our fishermen to exploit and explore.
Or to affirm their right to exploit.
To affirm in our sovereignty, referring to our sovereignty rights.
Right.
So meaning to say, these will help us operationalize this concept, basically, because, of course, it's a strategy. It's a work in progress. It can be adopted by the next administration, or it can be canceled. So,
Right. Now, speaking of middle power means a number of things, right? A certain level of economic development, but also a certain level of military capability. How far have we come? I mean, obviously, none of us have an illusion of we have come far enough in terms of where our neighbors or our peers are. But the Philippines is a $500 billion economy already. 15 largest countries in terms of population. Actually, I think 13th or 12th. It's just bound to get bigger. We're going to become a $1 trillion economy within a decade, if not shorter, right? At the rate things are going. It's just basic mathematics, right? Spending a few $1 billion every year on new weapon systems acquisitions, it's perfectly within the global average. The reason I'm saying this is when I mentioned something about this 10-year plan for 35 billion, you see comments like, oh, we haven't solved, first solve poverty, first solve, and my point is like, that seems to be a very problematic mindset because national security is the bedrock of everything, right?
Definitely.
I mean, you cannot, and it's not mutually exclusive. And that's why I want to also discuss that actually you can develop a robust defense industry that earns you money and helps your economy, like Korea.
Yeah.
And the R&D in the defense industry can spill over into civilian sector, into high-tech industry and all. It's like people have a very limited understanding, like this guns and butters trade-off, when in reality it's much more complicated, not to mention indispensable for it to have a strong defensive capability.
I agree with you. What's the projection for our Philippine economy? By 2050, we are projected to be the 14th largest. Until 2075, we're
top
even,
10.
We're even bigger than France by that time.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Imagine all those developed countries will decrease.
Bigger than Japan. I saw, yeah.
So that's the projection. So meaning to say, because you have now the money, then you can buy more sophisticated armaments, and definitely you would be needing an army of high-tech pilots and sailors, basically. So I think the generation of Alpha and Beta, Filipino Alpha and Beta, will definitely change their ways in terms of how they would appreciate military modernization.
This is below, after Gen Z.
Yes, after Gen Z.
Oh my God, yeah, you're right. Oh wow.
The Alpha generation now are natives of artificial intelligence.
Right.
So imagine the kind of
You're right.
of military modernization that we will be facing later on. And by the time the Philippines has the money to do shopping spree. And of course, I agree with you. I hope that the government should invest now with the SRDP, with the industrial complex, because we have to train them instead of them going out, doing this brain drain. Let's develop them. We have an army of cyber experts. Then let's train them. Definitely, when you do external defense, we will be needing more Navy and Air Force officers. So hopefully the Army will decrease. Maybe they could operate the cybersecurity of the Philippines and do other important stuff aside from the civil military operations that they've been doing. So you see a reorganization
Complete
also.
reorientation,
because, yes, when you do strategy making, you have to reorganize also. It should jive also with the kind of equipment and military material that you have.
Now, speaking of internal security, one of the issues that's coming out is cyber warfare, influence operations, infiltration by foreign powers, because war is not just what you fight in the seas. Well, we're a archipelagic nation, so before you get into the Philippines, you still have to get through our waters first, right? So obviously Navy and Air Force is important. But one area where the Philippine Army or the domestic security agencies could be very active is to fight against infiltration by foreign powers, right? I mean, there are all these discussions now about whether these online casinos are spy agencies and all of that. What about students getting to university across country? Can you tell us a little bit about that? How to fight against sharp power of authoritarian countries who tend to be also our rivals in many areas? Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. Last time Malacanang has been fighting about the where they copy the voice of the president.
Yes, the deep fake.
The deep
But
fake.
actually, we call it cheap fake because it was not done very well.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Cheap
Maybe
fake
because
is
it's still the maiden.
yeah. It's the opening shot, right?
Yeah. So you see, 10 years from now, you have a sophisticated
Yeah,
artificial
right.
intelligence where espionage can also become big. Last time we heard about these Chinese vessels loitering from Batanes down to Philippine Rise, and that was also their strategy during back in 1995, where they were talking about the Fishermen's Wharf, and that they've been sending their research vessels partly because of this espionage. So remember, when it comes to cybersecurity right now, I mean, this is the problem of the world because majority of the children right now will become leaders of the future who were trained by these kind of platforms on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So, and of course, we have the STEM program in in our education, and most of them will become these scientists, engineers in the future. And definitely, this will become a problem of national defense and national security.
Should we have a dedicated, national law to deal with this kind of, all sorts of multifarious threats? It could be artificial intelligence. It could be, the spies. It could be infiltration of our bureaucracy. I mean, we're seeing in Europe they're waking up to the reality. I mean, Germany recently there was I think a parliamentary staffer was caught to be spy for China. In France, some people are flagging this. Suddenly in this strategic port, so many people there are marrying folks from China, and what's going on there? Like again, of course, again we have to be very careful about this discourse because unfortunately there's prejudice,
Yeah.
there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of xenophobia, not to mention anti-Asian hate we saw during the pandemic. So as Filipinos and Asians, of course, we have to guard against that. But at the same time, as a good senator said, diba? I mean, we shouldn't be fools. I mean, diba? I mean, we're not fools. We have to also look at the national security here. Do you think we're making the right moves, or do you think at least we're waking up to that reality? Because you talk to officials, you're a security sector person,
Yeah. Of course, laws are meant to address the gaps in our society. Say, for example, the love bug. At the time when the love bug was created, that changed cybersecurity worldwide, which was invented by a Filipino student.
It always happens.
We don't have laws at that time. We cannot prosecute him because of the lack of laws. And then, of course, we have commercial electronic laws ready, and then down to the concept of cybersecurity. Same as true with espionage. The level of our understanding of espionage is very land-based and traditional. Things have changed now. We're talking about artificial intelligence, and of course, there was a time that recently we see, of course, no, not because we wanted to discuss about the influx of the Chinese students, but perhaps, there may be some way on how to investigate and to inculcate to everybody's minds the concept of national security, espionage, because of course there's a business side of it, politics and so on. At least now we are trying to address these big, grand concepts on espionage, national security. Everyone is talking about it because the public has been talking about it also in the media and of course in public discourse. Now, what are the solutions on how we could address this? Of course, you have to allow also our government leaders to understand this sophisticated concept of national defense and national security, and cascade it also to the grassroots, because basically, like our fisher folks in the West Philippine Sea, they experience it. We have to consult them also. What do you know about this one? It's like teaching the radicalization or whatever.
Yes, I mean, we had similar challenges also dealing with extremism, religious extremism, right? Yeah, without going to Islamophobia or racism against people of certain background.
Yeah, so you have to level off also and listen to different sectors of the society. That's the reason why you have now the whole of society approach.
Yeah.
We don't use anymore the whole of government or whole of nation approach, but the whole of society, because there
Because
are
the
different
education
sectors.
system also,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
They should be part in the discourse, in the debate, and definitely they have a say, especially now in a social media world. Everyone
Right.
has their own say. Truth has become subjective now, depending on who has the bigger voice, who has these grand ideas, and so on.
Dr. Cabalza, so I mean, we have interesting cases like in Finland, for instance,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
kindergarten children are trained against Russian
Yes,
disinformation,
of course,
right?
of
I mean,
course.
that's the level of preparedness of some of the countries. And Finland, until recently, was a neutral country, so it
Yeah,
had to
yeah.
join NATO eventually. Do you think the Philippines should also move in that direction of fighting against disinformation, deep fake, cheap fake, all sorts of things that are meant to create cognitive dissonance? Yeah, because
I agree.
cognitive warfare is part of strategy, including on the West Philippine Sea issue, and obviously we know who could be the suspects behind this. Yeah.
In our history, we've been resisting foreign aggressors. That's the reason why perhaps the Chinese dislike us because of our resistance. And even European diplomats, they've been asking, how come that the equation when we talk about the South China Sea, it's between China versus the Philippines? Maybe because among the claimant countries,
We're the only one who's standing up.
we're the most vocal,
Yeah.
and of course we criticize a lot the aggressiveness of China because we're a democratic country and we are very proud of what we have achieved when it comes to
Legal warfare,
legal
yeah.
warfare, the lawfare. That's the point. So I guess that's natural in us, and that's the reason why we don't want to lose this momentum, and not to forget to of course to have that unified narrative for the next generation to 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 understand it, because the problem with Filipinos, we have short-term memory. We don't want that the next generation will forget about it. Again, that's the reason why we keep on telling our story, because that's how we flex our strategic culture, basically.
Right. And you're from the north of the country also. We have EDCA bases in the north of the country. Last year we discussed about the rudimentary developments in the area. What are the bases in places like Isabela and Cagayan? And what is the latest development in Batanes, where Pentagon was reportedly supposed to build a facility? Can you give us a lay of the land in the north of the Philippines in terms of defense build-up, capability building, and our cooperation with the Americans?
Okay, if you try to look at the Philippine map, Region 2 or Cagayan Valley is like the head of the Philippines, because you try to look at the Philippine map, it's a humanoid figure. It's like a human-like figure. And definitely, Region 2, where you see Batanes, Cagayan, and Isabela, are very important right now because of their geographic relevance and importance, because of this tension happening in the Taiwan-Luzon Strait, and of course in the Philippine Rice-Benam Rice, and of course in the West Philippine Sea. So partly, you also have two EDCA sites in Cagayan that is located in Lalo and in Santa Ana.
Right.
You have naval base there, and of course an air, how do you call that? Lalo airport.
Right.
And then of course in Gamu Isabela, you also have an army camp. So you see the importance of those
So the
provinces.
Lalo one, I remember last year we were saying something like fishing hut lang yung mga iba. Like, is there a development there? And is the other one more like Subic style kind of base? Because when we think of EDCA side, everyone thinks it's all Subic. But the reality is it's a very, it's 50
It needs
shades
more
of differences.
improvement,
Yeah.
Especially in Lalo.
Yeah.
I think you have to improve it. Whereas in Santa Ana, it's like the mini Subic. Although the U.S. government has pledged some improvements or funding for these EDCA sites. They wanted to give more in terms of its development. And of course, copying the overseas security assistance framework of Japan, the U.S. in the last trilateral meet together with the Philippines, U.S. and Japan,
yeah.
they wanted also to differentiate overseas development assistance to overseas security aid. So definitely, if you, of course, President Biden also has asked the Congress, the American Congress, to give assistance to develop the EDCA sites for the Philippines.
Right.
That includes the three EDCA sites found in Cagayan Valley. So you see the importance of this region now. We're not, although of course it's scattered around the country, the 9 EDCA sites.
Right.
But given the geopolitical importance of Luzon right now, I think we should also develop this northern corridor. Now, your question about what is happening in Batanes. Of course, Batanes is like the northern shield.
Yeah.
Referring, of course, when we talk about the head, Batanes is like the crown
Yeah.
of the Philippines because Cagayan, Region 2, basically it's like the head of the
Or well,
Philippines.
China
right?
looks at it as a spear, so I don't know, like a crown with a knife or some sword. What's going on there? Because I think that was also a very sensitive issue. Because Mavulis, we're seeing development by the Philippine Navy. Some of the Balikatan exercise recently were in Cagayan with an orientation towards contingencies in the north. Obviously, everything is about Taiwan and potential invasion of Taiwan. What's going on in the Batanes one? And what's
Yeah, I've been telling to the media that of course when we talk about the development of Batanes, basically Mavulis in particular, this is about us developing our own ports because if you try to look at it, these areas are vulnerable to natural disasters, to natural calamities. So part of the multi-role agenda of the government to develop ports, basic seaports and airports is to help our nation basically
Right.
to integrate it because we are archipelagic, especially for Batanes. It's an archipelagic province. So how can you support the economy? Although Batanes is in the top 10 biggest economy in the Philippines outside of Metro Manila, they can afford to have those ports because
Right.
they have money. It's a tourist destination.
so it's more of an engineering issue, a logistics issue? What's going-
Logistics issue, but
Yeah.
of course it becomes a big political issue because of course the Americans
And the Chinese
and the
sensitivities,
yes,
yeah,
definitely.
exactly,
So
yeah.
it's full blown because of its geopolitical importance.
And speaking of warfare and influence, don't you think the Chinese will try to also, I don't know, send their tourists there to Batanes, to Isabela, across the north? I mean, you think the government is preparing for those contingencies or those kinds of possible threats?
Definitely, because of course, let's consider also the Taiwan Strait. It has not yet been resolved, and of course, we know the ambition of China to get
To resolve it by
to resolve
certain
it,
means, yeah.
certain means, either
yeah.
by force or through diplomatic means. We don't know because, of course, that's up to Taiwan and to China, basically. But we become a recipient of the problem if in case there would be miscalculation. That's the reason why you have to be prepared. That's the reason why part of external defense is your readiness. That's why you have the regular forces and the, of course, reserve forces. You have to train them to become ready in case of miscalculation or these contingencies, basically. And also, the reason why you have Balikatan exercises or war gaming is to rehearse a scenario. What if the scenario says that there is this occupation in Taiwan? Definitely, when you do that, there will be war. Then what
Yeah.
would be the contingency of the Philippines? So you are trying to rehearse the future,
I
basically.
mean, all war games I've seen by CINAS, CSIS, a more recent one, I think, by Council of Foreign Relations, also so that Philippines will be directly involved. I mean, bobombayin tayo kasi potentially an invasion of Taiwan will happen from southwest, which is right heading into our, our Batanes and northernmost
and it's
islands.
part
yeah.
of the first island chain.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
countries that are part of the island chain, first island chain would be Philippines, Japan, and of course Taiwan. So naturally, tayong tatlo,
Apektado lahat.
apektado
yeah.
lahat,
So we
no?
cannot be neutral. I mean,
Yes.
whether we like it or not. I mean, that's my problem with the neutrality argument. We're so geographically next to it, not to mention we have an alliance with the U.S., that I just don't see neutrality as an option. So the best thing is preparation and hopefully diplomatically deterring, right?
I agree with you.
Potentially
That's the reason why, of course, we are trying to expand our diplomatic clout. We are modernizing our armed forces because we wanted them to be prepared and ready in case of any eventuality. But at the same time, of course, part of that is the deterrence, the collective deterrence. That's why you wanted to expand your diplomatic clout because you believe that one aggressor will be deterred in case
Right.
of any eventuality.
The last part of this episode, I'm sure we'll have more discussions in the future, but I want to go back to this. So at the beginning, you said the Philippines can be a force on its own terms in terms of a middle power, a capable country. And we discussed South Korea, and I can also think about Indonesia on a more humble scale, developing their shipbuilding capability. Turkey now becoming a drone superpower, right? And then the Brazils and so many other countries, South Africa, developing countries, not wealthy first world countries, having pretty robust defense industry of their own. What are the lessons from these countries for the Philippines? Considering our level of development is not too far away from them, and we're also becoming very pivotal in global affairs, at least in our region, right?
Lately,
or India. Sorry, I didn't mention India. The most important one, India, obviously. Yeah.
Okay, there are a lot of lessons learned from there. First, the role of economy and the middle powers. The World Economic Forum pronounced last time that in the current age that we are living right now, we see a lot of middle powers, and they should be a catalyst of change. It's not because they have achieved a certain level of economic progress, then that's it. They have to say something. They have to change the rules of the games.
Positively contribute.
Positively contribute. Because when you talk about middle powers, you don't want to be greedy because you don't want great power. You leave that to the great powers to contest about it. You become a middle power because you want a better life, a better standing in the global hierarchy of powers. And you have to use that instrument of power to transform the kind of world that we are living in. And of course, by doing that, you can leverage with your diplomatic clout, and of course, improve your military interoperability and jointness in a positive way. Secondly, we can at least draw inspiration also from other middle powers, like you mentioned, South Korea, Indonesia. They did not have alliances, but they have strategic partners.
South Korea has a U.S. alliance.
Yeah. US,
not India, yes. Not India, not
India,
Indonesia.
because of its alignment
and
independent foreign policy. But we could understand South Korea because it's beside North Korea
and China,
of China, basically. But hopefully one day, like I told earlier, we should get out from that alliance because it's more appreciative for us if we can truly say that we are truly independent because not because of the alliance that we have, but because we have proven among ourselves that we are now capable of protecting and safeguarding our own maritime features. At the same time, we have a good economy and better leaders to support our industrial complex and our military modernization. And at the same time, you imagine the Philippines where we are respected because of our dreams, industry, and definitely because of our contributions also to this community of nations. So you see, it's very, very promising. Sometimes you dream about it, but the question there is, when do we have to leave from that alliance? So it's a big question mark also.
I mean, just my closing idea would be, U.S. is on the other side of the ocean. I mean, yes, there's Guam and Hawaii here, but we also don't know how long America will remain committed to this part of the world. Who knows? Maybe in a year we're going to talk about Trump 2.0 administration. It's going to be a totally different conversation. But I do agree with you that we have to consider a possibility that there will come a day where we have to stand on our own or in a coalition with other middle powers.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, superpowers are going to do what superpowers do, right? And we cannot just be the grass to the two elephants. We have to be the lions. We have to be the giraffes, right? It has to be a savanna, right? Not just two elephants in the grass. So on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Cabalza, for that comprehensive discussion on strategic culture and where the Philippines was 100 years ago and hopefully will be 100 years from now, right? So it's kind of a 2-3 century discussion. On that note, thank you very much. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Hidarian, and this is The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.